My story begins in the middle of the ocean when I was a ripe old age of 25 years old, and I'm standing in the top of a nuclear submarine on a deployment heading out into the Atlantic Ocean. And I remember this moment because I glanced around and there was not a ship in sight. I saw dolphins jumping over the bow wake as the submarine is cutting through the water, and the wind was blowing through my hair. I had much more hair back then. And I remember just reflecting upon the fact that pretty soon we're going to rig the ship for dive, meaning that we were going to slip under the surface of the ocean for the next couple months, and soon there'd be no more sunlight, no more fresh air, limited communication with the outside world, maybe 2 weeks of fresh veggies and fruit before we had to go to the frozen stuff. But most interestingly enough, we would be locked in a tube with 150 of our best friends and all of our personalities. Well, how did I get here? When I was in middle school, I got into a fight, and it ended me in the principal's office. Now, everyone knows that kids can be mean. They say and do mean things. And I was one of those kids that got picked on a lot. And I remember complaining to my dad about it. And one day he just got fed up and he said, "Son, if someone hits you, you hit them back and you hit them harder." Now me, I was shocked by this statement, right? Like permission for violence, because my dad was a police officer. So he was Mr. Law and Order, Mr. Do It Right. And so this was a milestone for me, because I'd never seen this side of my dad. But then also my mom co-signed, and I shouldn't have been surprised because she had a pretty quick backhand. Now, my dad grew up in the southern part of the US, a state called Florida, and he grew up on a farm, very poor. He was one of 13 kids, and he grew up in the Jim Crow era. So if anyone knows anything about US history, this was a very dark period. And that definitely shaped him into the man that he was. And he shared a lot of advice with me during my life, and I still remember it to this day. One thing he would always say to me is, "Son, life is about decisions. Good decisions lead to good results. Bad decisions lead to bad results. You have to continuously refine your decision-making process." He would also say to me, "Son, a man is a man is a man. There's no difference between the trash man and the chairman. They both put on their pants one leg at a time. Therefore, you must respect every person the same." And my mom would often say to me, "No one is going to save you. You have to be strong enough to save yourself." So you can imagine, after getting all this great advice from my parents, I was shocked by them condoning violence. Well, of course, I took that inch and I ran a country mile with it. And within a week, I was sitting in the principal's office. And now, I can't tell you exactly why I got into the fight, but I do remember my principal being very upset with me, because I was a good student. I got good grades. I didn't have any disciplinary issues. And I remember him saying, "I'm going to keep you on a straight and narrow." So he starts telling me about this program that met at 7 a.m. on Saturdays. And I thought to myself, 7 a.m. on Saturday, unsubscribe. Well, this program was a group of middle school students that would go to the United States Naval Academy, and they would be tutored by midshipmen in math and science. And so little did I know that this program would become a milestone for me, because it was my first exposure to the Naval Academy, where I would eventually go to school. So now we fast forward a few years. I'm looking at college. I apply to the Naval Academy, and I'm accepted. Now, to be clear, the Naval Academy is not college or university, right? You are preparing to become a military officer. So it's 4 years of intense physical training, 4 years of a really tough academic curriculum. And once again, my dad gave me some really good advice. And it was on the day that he was dropping me off for what we call plebe summer or indoctrination day. And he said to me, "Son, remember, don't let them get in your head. If you're running for miles and you're tired, so is the guy next to you. If you're doing push-ups and you're in pain, so is the person in front of you. If they can do it, you can do it. If they can't do it, you still try. This was another milestone for me, because even in times today, when I doubt myself, I still tap into that, what my dad told me. So usually when I tell people that I went to the Naval Academy, they always ask me, what was that experience like? And I always say it was character building, because it was. The Naval Academy does a really good job of stripping away all of your privileges and making you earn them back. So for your first year as a freshman, you're not allowed to have a cell phone, no music, no movies, no civilian clothes, only a uniform, and you can't come and go as you please. So you can only leave campus on Saturdays for 6 hours. So even though I graduated with a degree in engineering, I like to say I have a PhD in delayed gratification. And so it was around my third year or so I was at the academy, and I was trying to decide what job I was going to do when I graduated. So because I'm an 80s baby, most guys that I went to school with wanted to be fighter pilots like Tom Cruise and Top Gun. Me, I'm a closet nerd, so I wanted to fulfill my Star Trek fantasy. And because the Navy didn't have a space program, the next best option was nuclear submarines. But what really sealed the deal for me was I had a mentor who was then a young lieutenant, who's now an admiral in the Navy. He invited my roommate and I to an event. The event was called the Black Engineer of the Year Awards. And that year happened to be held in Baltimore. And when we get to the event, he made it a point to introduce my roommate and I to these gentlemen known as the Centennial Seven. So you're probably asking yourself, who are the Centennial Seven? Well, at that point, submarines had been operating for about 100 years in the US. And every submarine has a commanding officer or a CEO, and they kind of rotate every couple of years. So over the course of that 100 years, there have been thousands of commanding officers, but only 7 of them were Black. And all of them were present that day in that room. And so the conversations I had with these gentlemen, just their stories, their trials, their tribulations, that was a milestone for me. That's when I knew exactly what I wanted to do when I graduated. So after graduation, I go on to submarine training, and let's be clear, you don't just become a submarine officer. It's an intense training pipeline where you have to learn nuclear engineering, go to firefighting school, you do flooding simulators, submarine escape training, weapons training. I mean, there's a lot of things you have to do because you're almost like an astronaut in space. And after you graduate from university, it's about 1.5 years of training before you get to your submarine. And then it's another 1.5 years on your submarine of constant certification and learning and proving yourself. But once you actually reach a point at which you can potentially earn the privilege of being a submariner, you now become a servant, because everyone on that submarine is relying upon you to save their life, and vice versa. And so something we always say to each other is, either all of us come home or none of us do. It's literally life or death. And so when I think back on my time as a submarine officer, it was probably one of the most defining periods for me, not just because of the experiences, but because of the people. So my next milestone is when I decided to leave the submarine force. And that was a really tough decision. But a few years later, I was on a land-based assignment at a training facility, and I was talking to my HRBP equivalent in the Navy. And the Navy has a really good succession planning process, like it's fire. And he's sitting down and we're talking, and he's laying out for me my exact career path from that day for the next 10 to 15 years when I would become a commanding officer and have my own submarine. But while he's describing this to me, I realized I wanted more. I wanted more choice, because the journey is just as important as the destination. So I had a decision to make. Do I stay in and I go with the path that they've outlined for me? Or do I choose my adventure? Shortly after, I submitted my resignation and I became a civilian again. And when I think about that decision, although it was a challenging one, I never lost faith in the ability to bet on myself, I could accomplish. So when I think about my final milestone I want to share with you, it's the one that brought me into financial services and eventually here in Kenya. So at this period of time in life, I was working as a management consultant in the energy sector. And one day I get a call from a senior executive from American Express. I probably shouldn't say this, but from American Express. And he tells me that he'd seen my resume and he was really intrigued by my experience, that he wanted to meet with me and explore potential opportunities to join his organization. Now, I have zero finance background, right? I'm full score engineer. And I was kind of doubting, the move because it was a totally new industry for me. So I remember I called my dad. I said, Dad, I'm thinking about this career move. I'm not sure what to do. It feels like I might be starting over. I remember he said to me, he said, son, it's not about how you start, it's about how you finish. So with those words, long story short, I moved on to American Express. After successive career moves, I made it here. When I think back through all those moments that I share with you, it reminds me of a quote from my favorite book, and that's The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. I'm going to try to say it without butchering it. But it goes, no matter what he does, every person on this earth plays a critical role in the history of the world. And normally, he doesn't know it. That quote resonates with me because I think about all the milestones of my life. I think about the role that every person played, and whether they knew it or not, I'm so grateful for it. But also, it reminds me of the role I play in other people's lives because we're all in the same boat. So, thank you.
Brilliant.